Hey everybody, we're rolling. It's only been 11 days since my last video, which I think is a record at this point. It's good to be back into things. You can see the record shelving unit is a little more full than it was. I integrated last year's records in with all the previous years. That's always both painful and fun to do. And so this video that I'm going to do, I'm going to rank the 7 studio albums Aerosmith released from 1973 to 1982. I'll talk about a package and a hits package and a live record as well. They were extremely prolific. Last week on the 5th was actually the 50th anniversary since the release of, or 50th anniversary of the release of Aerosmith's debut record. Uh, Before I get started, I just want to talk real briefly about them. I'm 41, so I got into them during the Get a Grip era, during the absolute, what is probably the absolute height of the Geffen years, the comeback years, a lot poppier, still rock and roll, still America's greatest rock and roll band at that point. Um, and a lot of people dump on those years now. They kind of look back and history isn't as kind, but yet, they sold jillions of albums, bajillions of CDs and tapes and whatever. And there were a lot of great songs. And if you look carefully, you can just see Pump up here. We're not going to talk about this one, but this was part of the comeback, 1989. But we're going to talk about the initial run with the lineup of Steven Tyler on vocals, Joe Perry and Brad Whitford on guitar, Tom Hamilton on bass, and Joey Kramer on drums. And then there's an album without the guitar players, with different guitar players, and I'll mention that real briefly. So anyway, Aerosmith was just huge for me. They were, for a long time, before Motorhead, because I've spoken at length of Motorhead being my band, before Motorhead, Aerosmith was really kind of my band, and I just thoroughly enjoy their stuff. And my dad got me hooked on the older stuff because he had a cassette of Aerosmith's greatest hits, the first one. And maybe I'll just mention it now. It actually came out in 1980. A very good friend of mine who I also work with and I've known for years got me this copy. It had been given to him, and he doesn't have a record player. And so I had, my dad had the cassette, and then I had the CD. In fact, this was the first CD I ever owned as well. Christmas 1993? 4? Somewhere in there. I got my first CD player. My folks got me this as the very first CD, and I still have it somewhere. And I'll mention this once we get past the studio records again, real quick. But anyway, so this one holds a lot of memories for me. It's not an ideal hits package, but it's good. So anyway, yeah, my friends and I loved them. Saw them 3 times in concert back in the day. That was actually Aerosmith was my first concert too. Come to think of it, February 1998 at the Van Andel Arena in Grand Rapids. Kenny Wayne Shepherd opened. As part of the encore, Ted Nugent came out and played the old Rufus Thomas song "Walking the Dog," which I'm going to mention here in a little bit on one of the early albums. And man, it was just Aerosmith really defined a lot of my listening for a lot of years. And like I say, a lot of people these days are kind of dumping on the newer stuff. I like the comeback stuff, and I like the old stuff. But we're going to talk about just the old stuff today. It was a lot more blues based. It was a lot harder rocking. So without further ado, number 7, and I'll preface this, and I get to say this every now and then. I don't think there's a bad album here. I really don't. There are some better than others, obviously, but I don't think there's anything terrible. I don't have coffee tonight. I'm kind of coffeeed out for the day. So I have Twining's Irish Breakfast Tea with me, which, boy, you talk about firsts. It was the first tea I ever tried that I liked, and I've been hooked for many years ever since. And the guy who introduced it to me, a friend of mine, he taught me to leave. There are certain teas you can leave in the entire time after sleeping, and it enhances the flavor, and I think this is one of them. Oh man, that's good stuff. Anyway, number 7 is Night in the Ruts, and of course, a play on terms. If you switch the R and the N, as you can see on the back here, with bassist Tom Hamilton covering the N. So this one, the reason it's last, and you know what? I just listened to this a couple days ago, and the reason this is last is this was made while they were in the midst of their breakup. Joe Perry had actually left after these pictures were taken. It was finished in part without him. And if I can pull out the the liner notes here, it says, I just read it and see I lost it. Special thanks to Richie Supa for guitar work on Mia and No Surprise. And he probably did a lot more than that because Joe Perry was not particularly involved in this record. Brad Whitford would also leave. I'm not going to go into all the drama other than it was made during a very rough time. But there's an interesting cover of the old, I forget, the Shangri-Las did Remember Walking in the Sand. Reefer Headed Woman is on here. No Surprise is pretty good. 3 Mile Smile. The rest of it's good. It's not great, but again, there are some decent songs on here, and this is not the starting point for the original run of records, but it's not a bad album overall. Number 6 is the post-breakup record, and you can see this was $3.99. I got at a place called Vinyl Solution many years ago, and so this has Jimmy Crespo and Rick Dufay on guitar. Now tell me, were they not trying to get a Joe Perry look-alike? And you can see picture of Steven Tyler is actually wearing a wig there because he was tanning so much and he was on so many drugs by this point in 1982 that his hair was actually falling out. He was in extremely bad shape here. This one edges out the other one. It's interesting. It's a little more creative. Lightning Strikes is on here. Bitches Brew is really good. Bolivian Ragamuffin. So it starts out really good. Joni's Butterfly is a little whimsical. Rock in a Hard Place, parentheses, Cheshire Cat. Jig is Up. Push Comes to Shove. There's a lot of good songs on here. The one, seeing as I'm recording this on the 11th of January, they were one of 3 fairly big rock acts to have a song entitled Jailbait. And it's about underage girls. And of course, in the news right now, Steven Tyler, the girl that he had admitted inappropriate relationship with, who was 16 at the time in the original Aerosmith biography, he said she was 14. Who knows? I don't know what's going on. Being the father of a teenage daughter, my heart really goes out to this. She was just a kid in the 70s, So that song is pretty hard to listen to now. It's the opening song on here. And Steven Tyler's Creep. Unfortunately, what happened was not uncommon with rock stars back then. And I don't know what to say other than thank God that hopefully isn't happening anymore, shouldn't be happening, should have never happened. You just can't condone that kind of shit. You just cannot. There's no way to make a joke about it, So, anyway, that said, this is a surprisingly strong record, given it, and it is the only one without the original lineup, at least credited. So, anyway, number 5, and we get a little stronger here. I love the production on Draw the Line. The title track is fantastic. So this came out in 77. Um, the drugs were starting to get to them at this point. Joe Perry and Steven Tyler were proud of the term being called the Toxic Twins. It was a take on the Glitter Twins, who were Mick and Keith. Also, heavy into substances, but Steven Tyler and Joe Perry really outdid themselves. But I love the production on this. It's heavy, it's kind of muddy, got a heavy bass sound, great drums. The opening track, and I Want to Know Why, Critical Mass is great. Get It Up, Bright Light Fright. Um, yeah, you know, Joe Perry sings on, let's see, why can't I remember? Lead vocal on Bright Light Fright. And I'm glad I checked it, because I was going to say Get It Up for some reason, but it was Bright Light Fright. So Perry sang a few songs here and there over the years. Then side 2 opens with Kings and Queens, The Hand That Feeds. Sight for Sore Eyes is just a down and dirty rocker. And yeah, so this is a pretty good record, actually. So I suggest it. I like all of these. The Habits hadn't quite gotten the best or the worst of them or the better of them or whatever. That was Night in the Ruts, and that's where the fall apart came, and the music was not that great. It was good, but it wasn't great. There were still signs of greatness on this one. And now to the reason that I'm doing this. Of course, a repress here. Um, I don't have another copy of this. This is my original, and somebody had colored this in with pen. But this is an OG pressing released January, or an OG pressing released in the 70s. This is the first album, and so you look. Steven Tyler, of course, had been in the band Chain Reaction. They'd had a few releases. Um, they came together, working up in New Hampshire, in Sunapee, New Hampshire, even though they're basically all Boston guys. And so the downsides to this, the production is kind of weak. And, they were still clearly fleshing out who they were as a band. But, I mean, the opening song, Make It, is great. Somebody, Dream On is on here. And I'm going to poop on that song just a little bit. Only, I used to love it, but radio has killed it. That's one of those songs where if I never heard Dream On again, I'd be happy. Only because it's just so overplayed. But it's a bit, it was sort of the requisite, it was a template for all the power ballads that came after it. One Way Street's pretty rockin'. I'm a Kin is on here. Write Me a Letter. The first song they ever wrote together, Steven Tyler and Joe Perry, Moving Out, is on here. That's a real bluesy hard rocker. Starts out slow and builds. And then the aforementioned cover song, Walkin' the Dog, by Memphis DJ and the world's oldest teenager, as he called himself, Rufus Thomas. So, Tyler's voice is strange on here, because if you read in Aerosmith's initial autobiography, Walk This Way, I haven't read any of their books since. Steven said he didn't like the way his voice sounded. He was scared of the way it sounded, something like that. So he altered the way it sounded, and it just completely unrepresentative of what the band really could do or what they sounded like as far as his voice. Again, that said, there's a lot of charm to this record. And they were fresh, they were young, they were, not overdoing any substances at this point. All right, I got to take a quick sip of tea to, help the throat. And then, so we're into the top 3. And any one of these, they switch places for 1, 2, and 3 for me. They change. So it's like 1A, 1B, and 1C. So when I talk about them, there's, I hope that doesn't alter the way you look at this video or think about them. But if somebody out there says, "Oh no, well, 3 should be 1 or whatever," yeah, any given night it could be. So 3 to me is rocks. Yeah, and these are all original pressings too. Rocks came out in 1976. They were really just about at the height of their powers here, maybe sliding down just a tinge, but still just. I love this record, and a lot of people do. Back in the Saddle and Last Child open. Again, there's songs that radio has killed, but when I listen to the album from start to finish, I play them. Um, Down, Dirty, Nasty, Rats in the Cellar comes after that. In my top 10, maybe even 5 Aerosmith songs. Combination is a little weird. Opens up on the next side with Sick as a Dog. Nobody's Fault is just it's almost trance-inducing. It's fantastic. It's like nothing else they ever did. Get the Let Out is kind of funky. Lickin' a Promise is just straight ahead rock and roll. And then Home Tonight, one of the prettiest ballads that they ever did, closes out the song. And so this was Aerosmith, in its prime. Absolutely. These guys were on top of the world yet at this point. Number 2, and before last year, this one would have been less for me. I kind of overlooked it for a long time. But a good friend of mine really likes this record. He started playing it a lot, and I went, huh, maybe I'll just give it another chance. And I'm so glad I gave Get Your Wings a chance because, this 1974 Aerosmith sophomore record, Tyler sounds like he should, opens with the real groovy, same old song and dance. The heavy Lord of the Thighs, Spaced. I don't even know how to describe that one. It's a space rock. Woman of the World is great. SOS Too Bad is just in your face, balls to the wall rock and roll. Then they do an interesting thing on Train Kept a Rollin'. The old, I believe it was Johnny Burnett and his rockin' trio. Did it originally in the 50s, and then the Yardbirds with Jeff Beck did a really good job on it. And that's the version that they kind of emulated here. By the way, Jeff Beck just passed away today at age 78. So rest in peace to him, certainly. Just a mammoth player, hugely influential on Aerosmith and just thousands and thousands of others. So anyway, they do a sort of a slow, just 4/4 version of it, and then you hear it fade away and a crowd comes in, and then you hear a live version of it. But it's not really a live version. It's a fake, as was very popular to do back in the 70s. They just played it up tempo like they would in concert, and Jack Douglas, the producer, had worked on, of all things, George Harrison's concert for Bangladesh. So the sound, he still had audio recording of that. So the studio version, augmented with the Madison Square Garden crowd from the concert for Bangladesh, is what you actually hear on Train Kept a Rollin' here. That said, it's still fun. Seasons of Withers, kind of spacey, and Pandora's Box closes it out. Full of great wit and double entendre. Just a good rock and roll song. Which can only leave Toys in the Attic as my number 1. And this is my very first copy that I got when I was 12 years old. It's pretty beat up. This is another 70s copy. You can tell they're slightly different pressings, but they're both 70s pressings. I just picked this up last year at Off the Record here in Grand Haven, which I always promote. Go see John, great guy, fantastic record store in Grand Haven, Michigan. This is the original 10 for 10 Aerosmith record for me. Toys in the Attic, Uncle Salty, Adam's Apple, Walk This Way, big 10-inch record. Sweet Emotion, No More, No More, Round and Round, and You See Me Crying. I don't need to explain all these songs. If you're watching and you're an Aerosmith fan, you know all about them anyway. This is one that I can just play over and over and over, even with Walk This Way and Sweet Emotion. 2 more songs that radio has just killed. Corporate radio has just played them to death. And so if they're on the radio, I turn them. But when I listen to this album front to back, I don't skip them. I have to play them. They're fantastic. So Toys in the Attic, number one. Um, I said I would mention real quickly again, talking about the original greatest hits package. This was after Perry had been kicked out of the band, left the band, however you want to look at it. He left, um, most likely of his own volition. Um, he was hungover or stoned or something on a park bench in New York or Boston or somewhere, and some kid came up to him, said, "Hey, can you sign your new record for me?" And he thought, "What? I don't have a new record out." And it was this. So the band had put it out behind his back, and the record company had. Um, it has an alternate take of "Sweet Emotion" on it, where vocals fade out instead of a guitar solo. So they took Joe Perry's guitar solo off. Oddly, it has "Remember Walking in the Sand" on it. A lot of other songs that probably should have been on there instead. It has a really great version of "Come Together." Um, Beatles song. Aerosmith was part of the doomed Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band movie. They were was it the Notorious Villain Band or something? The only good thing about that movie was the soundtrack, and even parts of that were not very good. But Aerosmith does complete justice to Come Together. And before they had released that, on the infamous live bootleg record, which I love, a lot of people call this Aerosmith at their drugged out best. I can't, not being a drug user, I can't promote one way or the other. Um, there was definite tension in the air when this was recorded. It was recorded at I don't remember, was it Chicago Theater or a smaller place in Chicago, recorded at Texas Jam. It was recorded in various venues. Um, it's a good live album. It's raw, it's unpolished, which is great. No overdubs, no studio fixes. It just, they put it out to beat the bootleggers, is exactly what they say on here. Back in the Saddle, Sweet Emotion, Lord of the Thighs, Toys in the Attic, Last Child, Come Together, Walk This Way, where Joe Perry, it's an interest. I used to like it a lot more than I do now. Joe Perry uses a talk box on Walk This Way. Sick as a Dog, Dream On, Chip Away the Stone, Sight for Sore Eyes is fantastic on here. Mama Kin, SOS. Um, an old song, I can't remember who did the original, even though I should. I Ain't Got You, and then the James Brown song, Mother Popcorn, and those two songs were recorded in '73 in Boston. And then um, I believe it's on side four somewhere in there. It's a three or four. It's one of the first hidden tracks on LPs. Draw the Line is on here, and it's not credited. It's not written down anywhere, but Draw the Line is on this record. And then they close with a mammoth version of Train Kept a Rolling. So anyway, there's my ranking, my speech about the initial run of Aerosmith before they signed with Geffen, before the comeback. I thought about including Done with Mirrors from '85, which was really the beginning of the comeback. I'll talk about that another time. But for now, thank you for your kind attention. Go out and look all these albums up. If you've heard them, you know how good they are. If you haven't heard them, definitely look up those top three. So, cheers, everybody. Take care.